Welcome back to today's episode. And today we welcome Adele, where we're going to be talking about many things, behavioral change, and much, much more, repatterning our brain, and all of that fancy stuff that I'm excited to talk about with Adele. So, a quick introduction to Adele, and then we will dive into the conversation. So, Adele is a renowned for her expertise in behavioral change. Her groundbreaking work focuses on leveraging the brain's natural capacity to rewire itself, enabling individuals to overcome obstacles and achieve their goals. She has personally helped thousands of people from all over the globe transform their lives without needing to rely on traditional techniques like willpower, motivation, accountability tricks, and much, much more. So, Adele, welcome to the show today. Glad to have you on. First
Happy
of
to
all,
be here.
yeah, absolutely. It's always great to get expertise and love talking about brain repatterning. So I'm sure we get a lot of great insight today. So, what would be really useful for the listener I feel, first of all, would just be to get a bit of an understanding of what got you into behavioral change. Always really curious into people's stories. Sometimes it's like they've gone through their own journey or someone they've been close to. So yeah, just be really interesting how you got into this work where you've impacted so many people's lives.
Yeah, it definitely started with my own personal journey, Johnny.
Mm,
I was struggling with panic attacks for decades and very low self-esteem, very low confidence,
mm,
lots of fears, and I couldn't overcome them. And frankly, I tried everything. I mean, if there is something out there to be tried, I did it. I was, by this point, was a meditation facilitator. I was a yoga instructor. I had had decades of therapy. But because of the traumas of my past and everything, I just still couldn't overcome these panic attacks. Tipping point of a panic attack. But my mind immediately went into this observer role and it started to watch the panic. And I started to see how the panic was unfolding within my conscious brain. And I started to realize, oh, hang on a minute. I got a pattern for panicking that is occurring within my brain. And if I'm going to really address that pattern, that panic attack, I have to start with my brain and I've got to rewire it before these panic attacks will ever be able to stop. And so that set me on a journey to really try to understand my brain. I took myself back to university and I really studied the human equation, how this brain of ours works. And I learned all about brain plasticity. And then I created my own method to rewire it. And that was 12 years ago. So within about 6 weeks of me understanding how the brain works and creating this technique, I never had a panic attack again after that. My confidence soared. My fears just melted away. And so I started teaching it. And I've been teaching
mm.
for 12 years. And I teach now all over the globe. And it's incredible. Once we understand our brain and understand how this brain of ours works, once we have tools to work with it, we can overcome anything. And so that's what I go around teaching today. Because, after everything I did, I know that there are some people out there who are still stuck. And I can tell you, don't give up hope. There is definitely a way to overcome.
Hmm. Oh wow, that sounds like a lot of work was put into that, obviously. But it sounded like you were at a point, from my perception, where like you had done a lot and you're just like, really, I want to make a change here. So
Yeah.
with all these bits of information about like the brain, because I'd imagine there's quite a lot that you went through, right? How did you sort of like apply it? Did you like try one thing a little bit? Was there a certain mentor or teacher you had that was really helping you break through this? Yeah, just I know a lot of people can get a little bit overwhelmed when they're like going through things and trying to implement stuff. I just wondered how you took on board that.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was different because I could both observe myself subjectively
Mm,
as I was learning objectively how the brain works. So I could take everything that I was learning about the brain and how the brain is wired and how the
Mm,
brain changes and all of that. And then I could observe it within myself using meditation. So I had a bit of an advantage that way. And frankly, the technique I teach now uses both of these approaches, the objective and the subjective, to bring everything together so that the person can easily apply what it is, how to rewire their brain. So that was my personal journey. But anybody who doesn't, it doesn't have to go through all that. I make it extremely
mm,
simple. Like I said, I'm not a neuroscientist, and neither do you have to be in order to know how your brain works. Actually, we can really, really simplify it
mm.
in order to make it so that it's systematic and so that you know how to work it. All right. So if I can just start there, if you want me to, I can just give you
Mm.
a very, very brief understanding of how the brain works.
That would be
And
great, yeah.
okay, great. So an interesting thing about the human brain is we're not born with any instincts. And that might sound obvious, right? We have to learn everything. We learn through experience. But in a way, that gives us a great advantage. Okay. So here you are, you're born into this world, pretty much a blank slate. You have some patterns within your brain, but not very many. And every experience that you have, your brain takes that experience and stores it away for future use. And how it stores is it creates a neural pathway. And once you have that neural pathway, the brain uses that. In fact, it's its go-to. Okay. So once
Mm,
you have a pattern for an experience or for a situation, it prefers to use that pattern rather than reinvent the wheel, because that's the fastest route to action and
mm,
the best way for you to survive. And so each time we form a pattern based on a past experience, our brain just stores it and then uses it in the future. But what happens if you have experiences which were traumatic, for example, as
mm,
probably many of your listeners have? Well,
mm,
the brain also stored that pattern. And now it continues to use that pattern each time you face a similar situation. So
mm,
let's say that you faced a situation as a kid where you had a fear of rejection. Somebody rejected you, and
mm,
your brain form that relationship to rejection as that's something scary.
mm,
Today, you can't readily change that, okay? Because your brain is just automatic. It just uses that pattern every time you go into a new situation or you walk into a social setting and your brain goes, uh-oh, rejection is a
mm,
possibility here. And boom, it starts using that neural pathway. So if somebody's going to get away from these traumas of the past, we have to start by subtracting that pattern from our brain. And as
mm,
soon as you subtract that pattern, the brain does what the brain does best, form a new pattern. But it won't be based in the past, it'll be based in who you are today. With all of your adult faculties and all of your since experiences that you've had, your brain is able to take all that and piece together a brand new pattern that works for you.
mm. Uh, yeah, I really like what you said about like a pattern from like maybe like childhood or something that was like quite traumatic, because I know everyone's got like different backgrounds, and it's really interesting when I've seen even my behavior in my life compared to someone else. Like I've been someone who's wasn't afraid to sort of like get on camera and that kind of thing, and it was just like, whilst there's another very confident person I can think of was like terrified about being seen but really good with like as a photographer. But then for me it was like that abandonment behind like intimate relationships, and that kind of like pattern I could identify came from, you know, it's always a work in progress, but I identified that pattern back to like certain things I could pick out as well. And it was just like creating new ways of thinking and being that I learned a lot from my mentors. So definitely relatable in terms of there's that pattern that's sort of like running. So for you, Adele, like how can we begin, or like individuals you work with, how can we begin to like break that pattern? Is it just by identifying what it is? There's probably a bit of a way to it.
Yeah, so the technique I teach is 4 steps, and it does start with identifying a pattern. But let me give you a definition of a pattern.
Mm,
A pattern is an intertwined physical sensation, emotion, and thought. So when the three aspects of our being comes together, it results in a particular action or a behavior or belief, right? So a behavior being, say, that fear of rejection or fear of failure. Um, the physical sensation will be the contraction that you feel in the stomach or that gripping in the throat. The thought will be, uh-oh, I'm in danger here, or uh-oh, I'm going to make a mistake, or something along those lines, okay? So it's only when the three parts of us come together that it results in a particular action. Bolt from the room, stand in the corner, don't approach somebody, right? All of that stuff starts to happen. So we start by identifying, but we don't identify what's going on outside in the world. We start by identifying what are we feeling, where are we feeling it, and what one thought is going through our mind. Okay. Once we've identified that pattern, now we can do something about it. The second step is to own it. It's a pattern. I know it feels like it's the outside situation that is responsible for how you feel internally, but let's flip the switch. It's the internal experience that is responsible for your reaction to what's going on outside. Okay. So if we can flip that switch, you take ownership and you feel more empowered. So that's where step 2 comes in. Step 3 is to deconstruct that pattern. We're going to tease it apart. Your brain has plasticity. It's a neural pathway in your brain, and it can be rewired. So it's just a very simple way to just tease that apart. It will automatically snap into a different channel. A different pattern will take its place. So then the fourth step is to create that new pattern. Okay. So we have to have a method of subtraction, not addition. Our brain can learn through addition. It can learn new stuff, of course, and add new pathways. But how about we remove that one that's not working first, right? I mean, I'm working now with somebody who had the same fear that you had, Johnny, this fear of abandonment. And her mom had left her when she was 8 years old, and she'd never seen her mom after that. And of course, she was gripped with this fear of abandonment and with everything that comes with it, that people pleasing and that inability to let go of relationships that weren't working for her and all of that stuff. Well, she was able to rewire that within, it took her quite a bit of time. I mean, I'm not going to lie, like usually it takes 6 weeks to transform a pattern. In this woman's case, it took her a few months. But she was still able to just step out of that identity, just no longer have that fear of abandonment anymore when she knew how to work her brain. So the brain is a tremendous tool, and we ideally, we learn how to use it.
Oh, wow. I love that example you shared with your client who was there. For you with and this was something you managed to help with your panic attacks on yourself, of course, you mentioned earlier. Did that take a while to work through as well at the beginning?
That one took me about 6 weeks to remove that pattern of panic. And I'll give you another example in which it happened automatically like this. I had this deep level of shame that I thought was intrinsic to me. I thought it was actually built into my identity. And one day I was just working on the shame, and I was actually repatterning as I was walking. And I felt the shift in my brain, and it felt as if somebody had just opened up all the drawers in my brain, which contained shame, threw them up in the air, and that they come down in a different order. And I actually just broke out laughing, Johnny. And I just started laughing about the situation that I was ashamed of, that I was working on. I just started laughing about my experience of shame all of my life. And since then, I've never experienced that level of intrinsic shame again. It's just gone. So it sometimes it will work like that, like just one application gone. Sometimes you have to repeat it, the technique, a few times in order for it to go. But as long as you're working your brain and using its plasticity, it will shift. It will, and it will go. I mean, I don't think I've worked with anybody who hasn't applied the technique correctly and it not worked.
Oh, that's a really cool example as well. Shame, I know a lot of people have like mentioned that to me as well, being a challenge, and the anxiety ones. Thank you for being open about that. Is a big one as well. I know, and also I feel like in the world there's quite a lot of things to make us anxious as well. So the work
Oh,
you're
especially today, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yes, we've got politics and environment and work and economics, and yeah,
Mm,
it's all coming down at us. I mean, we really are in a time of chaos and change. And that's one thing that the human brain fears more than anything else is the unknown. And so
right.
we're all entering the unknown right now. So anxiety is big amongst a lot of people.
Mm. I'm curious, like leading on from that as well, like there's certain things I've noticed, whether it's like environmental things or like foods that in the past have kind of like activated maybe a high level of anxiety or like stress. When people are going through like this technique, is it like often recommended or guided to try and avoid certain things as well while they're going through this?
You mean like certain foods or alcohol or
Or
drugs or
just
things like that?
just in general, like whether it's like foods or whether it's like certain influences that make them in,
Oh,
yeah.
good point. Yes, yes, yes. So people will say, coaches might tell you to not listen to the news, for example, right?
Mm,
Because that will help your anxiety. You know what? We can't escape our patterns. I like to say,
mm,
wherever you go, there you are, right? That old
mm,
adage, it really is
mm,
true. Um, we can maybe try and turn it off. We can maybe try and not trigger that particular pattern. Like, let's take the news. So you're listening to the news and you're
mm,
feeling really anxious. That's because you're triggering that pattern, right?
mm,
But so that might give rise to you thinking, okay, well then if I don't listen to the news, I won't be anxious. But frankly, that pattern is still there. It's still underneath.
mm,
And we really can't avoid very well anymore. So we're better off to go directly to the pattern and
mm,
address it rather than trying to avoid stuff.
mm,
And that sometimes takes some hand holding, right? Like, it takes somebody who can hold that space for you to go through those fears, and somebody who's been there before and say, it's okay, like we're going to get through this together. Sometimes that's required. And there's nothing wrong with reaching out for help and not trying to go it alone,
mm.
right?
It's yeah, and you mentioned like you try and it's like I mentioned at the beginning, and it's sort of mentioned in your bio, the tradition, some of the traditional things like willpower, not just like using that by actually going to the pattern as well, because yeah, maybe it's always
Yeah.
going to be there, right? Whilst if the
Yeah.
pattern's changed, it's not.
Yeah. And I speak out against willpower.
Mm,
I don't believe in it. I don't believe it works effectively. I think it works for a handful of people who have a pattern for willpower.
mm,
But if somebody doesn't have a willpower pattern in their brain, it's really hard for them to use willpower to barrel through. Okay.
mm,
Um, Willpower works because eventually over time you trickle in a new habit. Okay. And each drop you trickle into the brain by doing it again and
mm,
again and again, eventually forms a new pattern. But willpower doesn't work because the pattern is in control, not you.
mm,
Okay. And when the pattern is in control, the pattern will have its way.
mm,
There's also something else that neuroscience now knows that wasn't known 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And that is that action is actually taking place first in the subconscious, and then the conscious mind is catching up.
mm,
Okay. So basically, that means that you're moving. You have the impetus to move towards the cookie jar before you know you want a cookie.
mm,
Okay. So willpower is kind of like pulling the train back into the station after the train has already left. We're much better off to look at what we've done after. Okay. So the action that the pattern has taken,
mm,
ask ourselves, does that work or not work? Okay. And if it doesn't work, let's remove the pattern so that the next time you don't have the impetus to move towards the cookie jar, right? You don't have the
mm.
pattern that's moving you in that direction. Then you don't need willpower to stop yourself from
Mm,
moving in that direction. Does that make sense, Johnny? Because
mm.
it's a really interesting way to look at the brain, right? The brain's already moving, action's already taking. So let's just remove the pattern that is taking that action rather than try and force ourselves to not take the action.
Yeah, absolutely. So this sort of stuff helps, like with certain, I may be wrong just for my understanding, but for things like addictive behaviors, like whether that's like a social media or maybe it is alcohol or maybe it's like overeating,
Or
whatever
even
it is.
overthinking, right? Like
I just
thinking a particular
that's
thing
it
that you
is.
can't stop worrying about, right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that is. It's we're saying it's better to, or as a better approach neuroscience has found is to actually look at that subconscious like patterning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
rather than
And
trying to.
subtract it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is kind of like the what we're talking about on willpower as well. There's a great book I read called "Willpower Doesn't Work" by Benjamin Hardy, and I thought it was a really good book for systems in place. But he's very good at kind of like putting the system so you can't actually do it and all these kind of things. But there's still that underlying sort of like psychological like element as well, right? So
Yeah, there's still the desire or the, yeah, like I said, the impetus to move in that direction, right? Even if it's not even a desire. In fact, some people don't even know that they're doing it until they're halfway through doing it, right?
mm,
that's that's what tends to happen.
so Adele, I just want to ask a little bit more about like confidence and using this
Yeah.
specifically because the listener will really like to learn how to sort of build their confidence in whatever area it is in their life, right? Now, for confidence, you can go out and then do things, and maybe that'll build a little bit more temporary confidence, of course. Like you go out,
Yeah.
you push yourself to deliver a speech, and maybe become a bit more confident. But for this, be really curious just to hear, and we may have covered it already, but how you can build confidence in yourself by rewiring the brain in this way.
Yes. Great question. So, first of all, what you want to look at, guys, is not how to be more confident. What you want to look at, it's what's between you and confidence. Okay.
Mm,
So Johnny's mentioned stepping out on a stage. There might be a fear of stepping out onto that stage, right? That's what's between you and being confident. Or if you're in relationship, it might be, you know what, I don't think that I'm relationship material. Great. That's what's between you and confidence. So you want to make a list of everything that's in your way of being confident. And then you're going to subtract each one of those. Now, what
mm,
will end up happening is you will just land in confidence. Okay. You will arise as a confident person. You won't
mm,
have to strive to get there. You won't have to manipulate yourself to get there. You're just going to land there because you're going to get rid of everything that's not confident within yourself.
mm,
Okay. Know that everything that is not confident within yourself is because you have a pattern that is doing that. Okay. It's not you. It's
mm,
not Johnny who isn't confident. It's a pattern that lacks confidence. Okay. And that's a
mm,
really helpful way to look at your brain. Oh, wait, it's not me. It's I have a pattern that is fearing. I have a pattern
mm,
that is anxious. And that gives you that little bit of distance between you and what you're doing, you and the behavior, right? And
mm.
it allows you to deal with it, handle it, manage it in a different way. Oh, yeah, if I just remove that, I'll be confident.
Got you. Okay, so yeah, it's like identifying that sort of like peeling back some of these things and
Yeah.
yeah, putting down the list. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. Peeling back is a really great way to look at it. Yeah. You're
Yeah.
just going to peel away everything that's not that, and then you will be that. And that's true of anything, right? So if you feel that you don't have a relationship right now, you just peel away everything that's preventing you from having a relationship. Boom. Then the opportunity becomes open for you to have a relationship.
Mm. And is it similar? Perhaps would you take a similar approach to things like procrastination and hesitation? What is the
Sure.
thing that's making me hesitate? What is the thing that's making me procrastinate?
Okay.
What's that behavior, or is it slightly different?
It's slightly different in the
Mm,
following. People don't procrastinate, they avoid. So that's really important to know, right? Because if
mm,
you're procrastinating doing something, you're better off to ask yourself, what am I avoiding?
mm,
Okay. Now, what you will be avoiding is not the thing that you're trying to do. What you'll be avoiding is the feeling that comes over you when you think about doing that.
mm,
Okay. That's what we really avoid is those internal sensations, that internal experience. That's what we want to run away from. We end up running away from the thing that we want to do out there, right?
mm,
Because we're trying to escape what's going on inside. So people don't procrastinate, they don't procrastinate, they avoid. And what you avoid is the internal experience when you think about doing the thing.
Mm,
So if you're avoiding getting out on the stage, we'll just come back to that example, right? It's because you're avoiding that fear of stepping out on the stage.
mm,
Okay? Deal with the fear, you'll be out on the stage.
mm. What about something like boredom? Like you're putting something off just because it's discomforting, it's in a boring sort of way, like people put off doing their taxes and then it gets really stressful at the end. And I'm usually pretty good with that, but it's because I'm one of those
Yeah,
weirdos who likes numbers. But yeah.
yeah. So being motivated by reaching a deadline, right?
Mm,
But yeah, boredom is interesting too, in that again, the human brain doesn't really get bored. I know that sounds weird because you feel like, oh my gosh, this is such a boring topic. But if you really dive into what is my pattern here, what's going on for me when I think about doing this, right?
mm,
There'll be some form of irritation or something that you're trying to escape. And boredom is just a way to just get out of the situation, right?
mm.
Oh God, I'm just gonna, I'll just go on my cell phone and just start texting people and just avoiding whatever it is.
Could it be something? Yeah, that's. I thought that might be your answer. I don't know why, but could it be something like the feeling? Because this has been me in the past, just identifying it. Could it be the feeling of being feeling stupid? If this is a boring task,
Mm,
but actually, if I
yeah,
do this and I can't do it, I'm going to feel stupid and therefore maybe not enough as a person. Could that be something
absolutely.
beneath it? Yeah.
Yep. There's always something, especially with boredom, procrastination, avoiding, there's always something underneath that. And that's what you're really looking for. Same with anger and blame, Johnny.
Mm,
There's typically something underneath that, some
mm,
fear, something that we're trying to escape, and expanding emotions like anger and blame, they help us to avoid looking at internally what's going on in here.
I
Yeah.
could.
But all that's to say, that sounds like it's a lot of work. It's actually easier to look inwards than to try to avoid all the external situations that are going on around us,
Mm,
right? It actually becomes much easier to address it as a pattern and go, oh, yeah, okay, this is just a pattern. All I got to do is subtract that, rather than trying to fix this and solve that and run away from this and do this and strive to be this. All of that becomes really heavy work.
mm. Super insightful. I love what you said about boredom because I know that's a typical go-to. Oh, it's boring. Don't want to do it. I've been guilty
Mm-hmm.
many times. So yeah, it's just that's a really good kind of way of hearing it for me. So no, I appreciate that one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So yeah, Adele. Just we've sort of wrapped things up today. Just wondered if there's maybe a final point you wanted to share, maybe re-emphasize about like repatterning your brain or behavioral change, and then also where the listener can find you and find out more about your work, because obviously you're impacting many lives out there.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to share just a little bit about this concept of the inner critic.
Mm.
And,
Yes,
you know,
please.
yeah, I like to say that every brain has an internal guide.
Mm.
That guide doesn't speak English. It doesn't speak any language for that matter. It speaks in emotions.
Mm.
And oftentimes it will, when you're running a pattern that doesn't work for you, it will attempt to tell you that by making you feel bad or by criticizing you or something like that. It's just an indication that you've got an unworkable pattern that you're running. So if we can turn that into the messenger, then we won't shoot the messenger so readily. Okay. It's not really trying to hurt you in any way, although some people's inner critic can be so cruel. I mean, it's shockingly
Mm.
cruel. Okay.
Oh yeah.
But really, in
Yeah.
a way, it's just an indication. Oh, okay. What's going on in here that is not working for me? What am I
Mm.
feeling? Where am I feeling that? Right. What one thought is going through my brain? And try to just clip that mind of ours. It tends to run off down rabbit holes. Try to just clip it into one thought. And then just, get my book. Johnny, my book's for free on my internet. Just get my book. It'll give you the full 4 steps.
Hmm.
And then you'll be able to follow those 4 steps in order to reduce that inner critic. Because the inner critic is so harsh today.
Mm,
I find it's getting louder and louder in most people's brains. So I really need you to know it's just a pattern and that it can disappear.
mm. No, that's a great share, because I know inner critics. Thank you for touching on that, because inner critics is a very common topic that people mention about, certainly in feedback to the show. So yeah, it's just
Yeah,
been
yeah, and it
emotions.
really is. It's almost like a layer, right? It's the layer on top of the pattern. So
Mm,
you got the pattern underneath, then you got the inner critic layer, and then you've got the situation,
mm,
right? And so if we can get through the
mm,
inner critic, we can get to the pattern.
mm. It's a good way of looking. I like the way you've described that. Yeah, the situation in the critic and then the pattern beneath that.
Hmm.
Cool. So yeah, Adele, that book's you said available for free, going the 4 steps. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, where can the listener find that and more of your resources?
Yeah. So the best thing to do is go to my website, shift4steps.com. That's the number four. So
Mm,
SASHIFT, number four, steps, STEPS.com. There you'll find a free book. You'll be able to book a call with me if you want some personal support. I think there's a free video on there too. So there's
mm.
lots of free stuff on there that will help you. And yeah, and best if you're struggling with anything, please feel free to reach out. I do 30-minute consultations, and we can get you on track to repatterning the brain.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I'll be sure to put those in the show notes today. So once again, Adele, a massive thank you for so much value you've shared today. I've taken a lot of notes, and I'm sure the listeners taken a lot of value. So thanks so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Johnny.
So that concludes our episode for today. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.